Man, I love Hang On. One of my favorite games of all time. Just simple fun, you know? And from, a perspective of technology, it was a real powerhouse. Two Motorola 68,000s, 28 megahertz on the graphics board. Just a real excellent game. Yeah, there's just something about Hang On, you know? It might play the same every time. It might not have the most branching patterns, say, as Outrun, but I still think it's a really fun game, and I'm really happy to own a cabinet. I didn't really know about Hang On when I was growing up. I went to a few arcades, but, Hang On was a little before my time. And, just never really saw it. And didn't really even know about it until Shenmue. When I played Shenmue, I fell in love with Hang On. And, it was just one of those things where I never played the arcade, but I had played it on Shenmue and really enjoyed it. So I had never really experienced it outside of Shenmue. And I went to Hershey Park, and they had a machine, this machine, but the brake was broken. So I played it, I enjoyed it. But it being broken kind of detracted from the experience. Also, they had a super hang-on ride-on machine there, which was really cool that I had found a year prior. So I think it kind of, downplayed the experience a little bit when I played this for the first time. So flash forward to a couple months back, I found an auction, and I was able to pick one of these up for pretty cheap. Didn't have a monitor, so I had to get an LCD, as you can probably tell, but it looks pretty good. Obviously I would prefer the CRT, keep it all original, but those Model 20s that came in this are hard to find, and I am still learning about CRTs, so I figured this was an easier option for the time being, and I'm happy with it. I was able to get everything wired up, and turned out the machine worked. Didn't have to do much other than get the monitor going, so that was great. Can't complain about that. And I've just been really enjoying it. It's just one of those games that it's just a classic arcade game. Practice makes perfect. You just really you can't beat it. Sometimes you can get so sucked in and just tours, and it's great because I can do that now. So it just adds so much using the torsion bar, you know, and just standing in front of it, you feel so engaged with the machine, and you know, especially bringing it back to life as well. I mean, back to life, but but yeah, it really makes it a special thing. So it's cool keeping these things alive. So yeah, but it's just a really complex, well, simplistic, easy to pick up, but the difficulty really ramps up, and you know, I think it's a lot of fun. I still haven't completed the 5 stages yet. I have almost gotten to the 4th stage after the desert, but not quite. Still haven't beaten the desert. So for me, it's still a fun challenge, and you know, I could see how someone could find this dated. Definitely could see that. Given with all the crazy stuff that's out there today, but it's got a certain charm to it. There's something about it that, you know, there's a fun, addictive, quick quality to the game that just keeps me coming back. You know, I can sit here and I can play for 5 minutes for 1 or 2 credits, or I can just sit here and keep pumping the credits in. And I mean, either way is equally as enjoyable, and I think that's just something I really love about older arcade games. You know, the good ones, you can really sink your teeth into them. I mean, they're simple, but there's an addictive quality that just keeps you being like, I could do that. I can beat that. If I had just done this, and I had just not crashed here, or if I had just weaved through that pack a little bit better on stage 2, you know, you would have had that extra time. And it's just a really fun game. And I mean, it speaks for itself. 1985, when the game came out, it was the most popular arcade game in the United States, as well as Japan. So, I mean, back then, everybody was well aware too. You know, besides Shenmue, there really isn't a great place to play Hang On unless you have the Yu Suzuki book. There's a disc in there that has Hang On, Outrun, Power Drift, and I think something else that AM2 made, maybe Afterburner, and those played great, but that's basically just the stuff from Shenmue. Nothing really compares to the magic of the arcade. So no discussion of Hang On would be complete without discussing the hardware. The hardware is one of the most exciting parts of Hang On. I mean, look at those graphics. It's unbelievable what they were able to do. I mean, coming from previous games, I just think there's a real graphical improvement. Sprite size is massive. So many on-screen sprites at the same time. You know, it was really just able to produce on just such an incredible level. I mean, a true powerhouse for the time. Just a quick history lesson. Sega, I have to look at some notes here. So Sega first kind of had their foray into scaling boards with the VCO object board. That board basically was Sega's first attempt in 1981 to create a board that could scale sprites and produce a 3D effect. I don't know much about that board other than that it was one of the predecessors to the quote-unquote superscaler board. But I just found it interesting that Sega, had been trying their hand at this for a period of time. So with the VCO board, they had that sprite scaling technology, and then they had the Super 16 board, which utilized Motorola 68000s. So that board had one Motorola 68000, whereas this board has two. So there are two Motorola 68000s, dual processors. Now, I believe this is the first time Sega used dual processors on an arcade machine. Now, that's really interesting because Sega went on to use dual processors in a lot of their systems. So, for example, the Genesis uses X68000. So it's kind of an extension of the Super 16 arcade board set, and even an extension of this in a way. Because if you think about it, Sega CD had a Motorola X68000, 68000 as well. Keep confusing it with the Sharp X68000. But Motorola and Sega had a very, great relationship. And, it all started with these Super 16 boards and the Super Scaler boards. So it's just really interesting to think about that the hardware choices that Sega had made with the arcades that they built really shaped the future with their home console market. I believe they chose formats that were familiar to them and they had success with. I mean, they had great success with the Motorola 68000. I mean, hang on. Most popular, highest grossing arcade game in 1985. And beyond that, there was a whole slew of Super 16 games. I believe there was like 40 of them. I think Shinobi, all of those games that got great ports to Genesis, were that Super 16 system. So, I mean, really, these awesome arcade systems laid the groundwork for all of the home systems that, all of us know and love. And it's just really interesting to, think about the history and how Sega, since they had such a successful arcade wing, they were able to try so many different technologies. Nintendo, love Nintendo, they had a very successful arcade wing, but I think as they tasted the success of the NES, I feel like their presence in the arcade started to wane, and they started focusing on home console market. Whereas Sega, they were in there until the late 90s, till the end. Sega was making cabinets. They still make cabinets. Initial D. I mean, come on. So Sega's still doing it. I mean, to a degree. So, it's just interesting. So I got a little off topic there, but back to the boards. So dual Motorola 68000s. This is the main board right here. So, handles all the main processing for the game. Full disclosure, all of these boards have issues. I'm trying to fix them up to put in another hang-on cabinet that I got, but I'm still learning about everything. So luckily I have a second graphics board, so I can kind of show that off. This thing's really cool, just because it puts out so much power. I mean, this thing is putting out 18 megahertz, which is pretty substantial for 1985. I mean,
just to give you a frame of reference, this is only putting out 6. So, I mean 6.3 roughly. I believe this is 18.8, this board. So, I mean, it's really impressive what they were able to do with this board. And it's really cool to look at it and just think that, you know, all the things that we do in code today were being handled on a circuit level. It's just fascinating to me. So, graphics board, you know, the powerhouse, you know, what handled, this is also called the super scaler board. This is what handled, you know, the scaling and the sprites and provided that 3D effect. It was able to do Z buffering. So it did actually, oddly enough, a great quote from Yu Suzuki is that he said he always designed in 3D, and he would work back to make even his 2D games be 3D. So, and I think that's really fascinating because with the super scaler, when you're playing that game, you feel like you get that sense of movement. It really, and it feels like you're going down that course. And I think that this hardware did an amazing job at that. I mean, and this handles all the on-screen sprites, and everything is doing all of those motions. It's just such it's really impressive. So, hats off to the super scaler board. Hats off to you, my friend. Then we have the ROM board here. Basically just all the ROM and RAM for the board, you know, all the backgrounds and the roads and all that good stuff. And then we have the soundboard. And the soundboard is also pretty impressive. I believe it has some relatively high specs. I think it's in the teens for the clock speed, which, I mean, for the time, this is pretty crazy stuff. Like, to remind everyone, I believe the NES is, I mean, it's below 2 megahertz. It's probably 1.3, I think. So, I mean, we're talking like monstrous powerhouses right here. I mean, like, far beyond what would have been available in the home console and computer market. I mean, by a long shot. So, it's just very, I mean, and granted, it's a dedicated machine. It can only play one type of game. It can only play hang-on or hang-on-like games, like Enduro Racer, and I believe I think they released 5 games for this board. So it wasn't, you know, it wasn't the most versatile board, but it was made to do one thing, and it did it really freaking well. And I really respect that. And it's just, I look at this hardware and it really just, it fills me with wonder to, you know, think that just such amazing things were able to be done, and the technology didn't hold them back in the slightest. It's just awe-inspiring, you know? Just as somebody who really likes technology and it really, really respects this stuff, it really makes me appreciate this. And that's why it's important for me to get this working again, because this is a piece of history and it needs to be preserved. So, I know I kind of went off there, but this hardware is just very important, and I think that this hardware and other Sega boards are, you know, they tell the story of the company's history and the company's trials and tribulations with technologies and what they had successes with and what they had failures with. And, you know, Sega went back to the dual processor design quite a few times. I mean, like I said before, 32X, Sega CD. But let's go take a step forward. Sega Saturn also had dual processor architecture. So, I mean, it was something that didn't go away until basically the end, which is, I mean, it is what it is. I think it's pretty cool. Some could say it contributed to their downfall, but that's another video. Let's leave it at that. Let's just stop there. But, you know, this hardware, it's just beautiful. It's some beautiful, beautiful hardware.